and we've been involved now with TALA for a little bit more than a year, probably almost 2 years actually. And we have some experience in other apparel businesses and in sports-related businesses over the years. So we're typically looking for leaders and founders and brands that engage very, very clearly and in quite a deep way with their customer base, and the customers fall in love with them, and also brands that have some purpose that might be beyond just commercial. So we're delighted to be sponsors of TALA and investors, and we're involved in it with some other angels and some other financial investors too. The business has been making amazing progress over the last couple of years. So I think the best thing to do is probably just to start the Q&A and perhaps have Morgan explain to us a little bit about her background and how she got to where she is today. And then we'll spend a little bit more time and give some opportunity for questions at the end, talking about TALA specifically, the growth of the business, the relationship between the founder and the team, and some of the dynamics in the company.
Cool. Hi, everybody. So, background, I've been working in the retail and consumer goods space for decades now. I started working for big brands in New York, and I've worked for big brands in the UK. In quite a lot of channels, mostly in the fashion space. And my last 2 gigs have been in D2C startups in the fashion space, venture capital backed. And I would say, though, really at my core, what sort of ties it all together is a love of product. It's the reason that I chose this field. I'm a student of fashion, but not just the products themselves, but also how they get made, why they engage customers, why we find them so exciting, the journeys that brands go on. I've just always loved it, and it's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Very good. Just the one thing I would add is that Morgan's got a ton of experience working in the apparel industry and in different markets. We also have experience in other brands that you may or may not know. Rafa is one of them that is not dissimilar, although it's for cycling, and also The Fold and a business called Finisterre. So perhaps that's a good segue into maybe if I could ask you, Morgan, what is it about TALA? Tell us a little bit about your customers, and tell us why customers get excited about TALA, and you've got a deep level of engagement with them.
Oh gosh, yeah, that is such a good question, and I think that's really at the heart of everything that we do. But I guess just to start off with folks that don't know TALA, TALA is a sustainably made but competitively priced athleisure business for women, mostly aged 20 to 30, sold mostly online through our own channels, mostly in the UK. But that's sort of the technical definition of it. Actually, when I think of TALA, I think of a brand that has really deep engagement with its customers, a very strong product market fit, and there's a sort of cool, sexy zeitgeist about it. So it's not a brand just sort of doing the thing, it's a brand that can generate a lot of excitement. So we can have very exciting drop days where things sell out. And that is, just a wonderful feeling for us as a team to find products that resonate so much with the customer. And then we also have what we call sort of our core business, which is the day-to-day sales for our more evergreen products that are loved and we bring back over and over. So that's sort of who we are as a feeling, I would say, as a company. And what is it about it that resonates with the customer? I mean, it's so hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but I will say, we had the really good fortune of being founded by a woman called Grace Beverly, who some of you may have heard of. She has 1 million followers on Instagram and has done for some years now, a particularly remarkable feat considering her age. And Grace just has an incredible connection with her community. And I think a lot of the magic of TALA, and we can talk about all the really obvious things that one needs to build a really strong business. But at its heart, there is a magic there that is a function of my being a student of it, my passion for product, and certainly Grace's really extraordinary talent at engaging with her community and knowing how to have a two-way conversation. You know, I always say, like, when Grace is speaking to her audience, she's speaking to 1 million people, right? And to think that she's having a conversation with 1 million people and they're talking back to her and she's gleaning information from that. It's really a remarkable talent, and I think it is one of our superpowers that that's translated to TALA, because we love product and we make an amazing product, but we're also very good at being responsive to our audience.
Yeah. Just pick up on the subject of founders and Grace, because it's certainly our belief that people are at the center of all of these businesses, and it's true that not every brand has the opportunity to build its followers off the back of an individual, and one like Grace, who's a truly remarkable human and has founded several businesses and been extremely successful in that respect. So I think what's interesting when we talk about growth and the journey you're on, you didn't found the business, Grace did. Grace is still very much involved, you're the CEO. So maybe just a few minutes on how you met each other, and then with respect to growing the company, how your two roles interact.
Yeah.
Because that's a shift that has to happen at some moment in the business.
Yeah. I think Grace and I really see each other as partners in this business, and there are ways in which we are so similar and ways in which we really yin and yang, and I think that's probably the making of some of the better partnerships. And I think there's a lot of, we were introduced by a recruiter, so what I call an arranged marriage. And you know, it was incredibly good fortune that worked out. I think we had the right kinds of conversations early on about the company that we wanted to build culturally and values and mission, rather than focusing too much on the sort of nitty-gritty of it, because that was fairly obvious through our references and experience and things. And so we came into the business really aligned, and there are a lot of times, especially as we scale and we add headcount and we want to define our culture and preserve our culture, that I reference back to some of those really early conversations she and I had together about building a company where we wanted to come to work, and building a company that had values, and building a company that wanted to be different. And so I think that was really important early on to setting kind of a really strong footing for us. In terms of the day-to-day, it's fallen out in like a pretty clear way, actually. I mean, in some ways we have quite different strengths. I sort of run the real business side of things, right? So I lead the team, but I do all the financial aspects of it, all the data aspects, performance aspects, operations aspects. I'm involved, of course, in brand and product and marketing too, but that's where Grace spends most of her time. And Grace is really interesting because she can go quite high level and strategic on those issues, but she also, I think it would probably surprise everyone how micro she goes on it too. We just had a marketing director start, and she said to me, wow, I didn't realize Grace approves every model, every marketing plan, every product. I mean, she is really, really, really into the detail. And I suppose the natural thing to say is that sustainable over the long run? Probably not. We will eventually deal with it, but we are still a small company, and it's so important that it have her fingerprint. And so she really is in it on the creative side of the business, and then strategically we partner around direction and strategy and who we want to be in sort of longer term horizons.
Okay. The other thing that's true is that, and you can explain a little bit about this to us, is that the business model has changed at TALA. So the brand was created by Grace and developed traction through was basically a licensing model. And then at some moment, I think Grace felt the opportunity was much more significant than that, and probably felt, well, I'm not exactly sure, probably felt like she might have been losing control of the brand with whomever the partner was. And so there was a shift, which happens to be the shift at that moment that then she sought some investment from external parties, and we'll come on to, you know, how you did that and where you found the right partner, so to speak. But I think it's interesting for people to know this move from a licensing-based growth model to a sort of owned, operated, direct-to-consumer
Yeah,
type
yeah,
approach
yeah.
in the context of the history of the business. Yeah.
Yeah, it is massively interesting because it wasn't an approach I'd heard of before, but it was also very sensibly thought out. So it's an interesting one to talk about. Maybe a bit unique to Grace in the sense that Grace came with this audience, and so when she first set up TALA, what she was looking for was somebody who could do the logistics for her. She needed somebody who could make the stuff, right? And she had enough of an audience that she could be the marketing. And she found a really sensible partner. They had really good connections with a very good factory, and the range was small, and so it all worked. But one of the really interesting things is Grace has started a few businesses, as you mentioned, and one of my favorite kind of narratives with her is the reason she's chosen to put all of her eggs in the TALA basket is because Grace has started a few businesses. The constants in that are her audience and her, right? And the difference between her businesses is the product. And so when she launched TALA, she had a reaction like she'd never had to anything else she'd done before. And that was the real aha moment for her, because she said, this is really something special. The product market fit here is really different. And so she reached a point with the licensing arrangement where she knew this brand had potential beyond her reach, and she wanted to turn it into a proper brand, so she couldn't be the marketing for it anymore. And instead, she wanted to build something that lived beyond her and that really sat in the heart of the customers. So at that point, she chose to take it back from the licensee. And there was sort of a period of 6 months or so where it transitioned, and then that's when she brought me into the business to run it when it became an independent entity.
Yeah. And perhaps you could help us understand a little bit the growth of the business in the recent past, and what the drivers of that been, and whether it's geographic or different channels, and even the aspirations for the future. And then we'll talk a little bit about the funding that you've already executed, and then the funding you might have on the forward journey as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot. We have big aspirations, and I think that probably won't come as a surprise to anybody who's been exposed to Grace. Grace, I always say, is not somebody that makes small bets. And because we've seen this resonance with TALA and the customer, we really feel like the sky is the limit. I mean, there isn't an athleisure brand in the world that I don't think we could be as big as or bigger, and that is very much the ambition. In terms of what that means for our actual numbers, without getting to too many specifics, it's been a really, really good few years. We're 100% up on last year. This year, we beat the year before by 100%. When we first raised money with Active, we were a headcount of 8. We're going to be 40. And that's just head office. We've also got a number of functions that we outsource. And so the growth has been really eye-watering and very exciting, and everything that we said that it would be. It's easy to put the plans in place and to be very thoughtful about why exactly it's going to work, and yet the excitement of it really happening is pretty unbeatable. So we're still on the train. It's busy every day. We're also in the fortunate position that our economics are really quite good, what we would call our basket economics, so we don't lose tons and tons of money. That said, because we are a fast growth business, we do need funding. And so we raised a couple of years ago with yourselves another fund and some angel investors, as you said. We are looking to do another raise soon, but we are in the very fortunate position of not needing it, certainly not needing it immediately. It's really an opportunity for us to put money back into places we want to strategically invest, where we see pockets of opportunity to just sort of put some rocket fuel into the business.
One thought on funding and growth. Often that depends on the nature of the business model, if you're taking inventory risk or not. And obviously if you're loss-making and if your unit economics aren't yet fully developed. I think, as you said, the The unit economics are very strong for the business on every sale, but the challenge for the company is if it wants to double again in size, it needs to make bigger bets every season or every year on inventory risk that it's taking, which requires quite a lot of capital, and therefore you have to think about your flexibility in supply chain and how agile you can be, which I think is very much the word that you're focused on, yeah?
Definitely, and also you had asked about sort of where the growth was coming from, and the answer to that is fairly long-winded and complicated too, because it can't come from one place, and instead I try to think of it as sort of mature channels, learning channels, and testing channels, and also thinking about in terms of horizons, like what seeds are we planting now that'll come to fruition down the road. And some of those bigger growth bets, like going internationally or looking at new channels, are some of your more expensive ones. So you can be profitable in your core demographic because you've learned quite a lot and the engine's working there. But if you want to see big growth, you're going to be going into more experimental territory, and inevitably that becomes expensive. So you raise the money asking investors to place a bet that you're going to figure it out, but that on day one it won't have the same economics as your core business.
Yeah. On funding, often people refer to the commitment that an entrepreneur and their team make to a funder and vice versa. They refer to it as a marriage. And there's quite a lot of flirting that goes on before people get to the altar, so to speak. Where as investors, and we've also been entrepreneurs and run businesses ourselves, so we've been on the other side of the table, but as investors we're very focused on the people. Obviously some of the more basic information around unit economics, etc. So for us it was extremely important, for example, that we already knew Morgan from prior exposure in different businesses. We knew Morgan as a C-suite executive, and that was very good for us. We were very confident that she would be a great CEO here, and also to hear from Grace that she was all in. And this was her biggest bet, given that she had various other bets underway, and still does, yeah? So that's, if you like, from one side of the table. It's like, how do you get to the altar? Mm-hmm. It might be interesting just to hear for people how you get to the altar with the partners that you choose,
yeah,
and what just goes through your mind, and actually what has to happen, yeah, to reach that, yeah.
And actually, what's interesting in this particular case is it was a very similar thinking from our side, actually. When we went out to fundraise, there was a lot of interest in TALA, actually, which, again, maybe shouldn't come as a surprise if anybody's encountered the force that is Grace Beverly, but I've been through a few of these things before, and they don't always go easy. So, not that it was easy, but the interest was very, very high, so we were fortunate to really have our choice. And there's a lot of nuances that go into how it lands the way it lands, right? It depends how much you're raising and what size check they want to write. It depends on the terms of the agreement, and sometimes the people that you would love to have on board, it falls apart for some of those logistic reasons. But usually you can get past those things if it's a really, really good match. And certainly in this round, there were a couple of things that we had to come to an agreement on that weren't maybe our natural way of working. But I would say when we actually came to choosing the funds, we were very fortunate in that we really genuinely had our choice. And the two that we went with, Active and Venrex, we put a round together with the two of them. It was absolutely our dream scenario. And the reason it was our dream scenario was because both funds had very similar kinds of brands in their portfolios. So there was a lot of synergy in terms of what the connections they had and the advice they could give and the experiences they had seen along the way. And they both had substantial funds. They were both prestigious funds. So there was an option to not just have money this round, but also look at future rounds. And that's sort of the dream scenario. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes there's a perfect fund for you just for a check this time, and that's still the right decision, but it's great if you're going in with somebody who has deeper pockets, who can support you a little bit of the way along the journey, because that just means you can spend more time focusing on your core business rather than focusing on a lot of time fundraising. But also, what was interesting for us was Venrex and Active, I think of as being quite different funds with quite different profiles. And it doesn't really matter why so much as that having that difference on the team was very healthy. so that, you know, we're having a really interesting debate. Despite the fact that we're a small company, we don't have a very big board, we can still have really opposing sides and really debate something, which is very interesting. And also, similarly, because I knew Active and I knew a lot of the folks at Active, it felt like a very kind of known entity in a way that felt comfortable and like I knew what I was getting into. And the other fund I hadn't had on a board I sat on before and I didn't know as well. So it was slightly less known, but I was very impressed by their track record. And so it sort of made sense to put the two together.
I would say getting to know each other is a really important thing. It starts before a transaction of some kind. It can be, in our case, quite a long knowing of each other and following each other's backgrounds and careers, etc. Then there's the flirting, and then there's the marriage, and then there's a completely different phase of getting to know each other when times are difficult, or difficult decisions need to be made, or people have different contrasting views around the table. And of course you're making that leap of faith when you partner, and then you have to go on that journey together, and there's some give and take involved. I've been involved in a few situations where we thought, whether they were founders or other investors in a business, that people would behave in a particular way, and then subsequently we found out that we had figured that entirely wrong, and they behaved in a different way. Either their ambition was different, or their financing aspiration was different, or just generally their approach to the world and their principles were different, and that makes for more difficult situations, undoubtedly, but they're in no risk, no reward, I guess, both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately the interests are so aligned. You sit in different seats, and day to day my role looks very different from yours day to day, and yet you come together for these board meetings, and the alignment is really the same. And so it does make getting to decisions reasonably easy, because you just both understand what each other's best interest is and you want the same thing.
Yeah. I'm conscious of time. I think we have a hard stop in a few minutes, so I don't know if anybody has any questions from the audience. There is a microphone, I think, that can find its way to you.
Hello?
Hello, we hear you.
Yeah. Global shoppers, you talked about international expansion. The biggest buyers, or the biggest global shoppers for wellness, and certainly in the athleisure space, are the mainland Chinese.
I don't hear you, sorry. You say, sorry, global expansion.
Yeah, global expansion, in particular reference to the Chinese in China buying globally. I noticed, I just looked on social media in China, and I noticed there wasn't anything from Grace, or really from TALA, anything there. But I was just wondering, what had stopped you from getting Grace onto social media? She would be an instant hit, and you would probably overtake Lululemon in less than 6 months. I was just wondering what's held you back, and I'm sure there's a good reason.
And you mean social media in China?
Correct. Well, that's how purchases are made.
Well, I'm not Grace's agent, actually, and I'm not sure she would take well to me telling her what to do with her social media account, but if I was so bold. No, I think, look, China is a massive opportunity, right? And my background's in luxury goods, and so I've seen what happens to brands when they go into China. It's absolutely incredible. I've also seen it not work, and it's not like you flip a switch and it's done. So international expansion is very much an ambition, but we're also trying to do it sensibly in markets that feel like an easier sell early on, to learn some of the logistics around it, to learn whether you want a marketing team on the ground or whether you do it in-house, whether you want 3PL local, you do 3PL domestically and you ship, and some of those things we'll learn from markets that are probably more similar to the UK before we go into China, but would love to go into China. Watch this space.
And any other questions? Down here.
Thank you very much. Are there any situations where the commitment for sustainability comes into conflict with your day job, possibly as an investor or possibly as a business decision?
Sustainability, yeah. Well, I mean, you're going to be probably equipped to answer this from a different perspective. From our perspective as a firm, we have some principles and we want to follow them. We want to be investing and doing the best we can and involved with brands and founders who want to do the best they can in the knowledge that we can't solve all the problems around the world. So, and there are different degrees to that, where we have some businesses that are fully focused on sustainability but being commercial at the same time, and others that started in a commercial place and want to be sustainable. So we feel like we have to always do our best, and that's right at the top level of our investment decision making. It's like, what are the sorts of businesses we'd like to be involved in where there can be a positive impact, yeah? We're not purely an impact investor, and I suspect there is a tension also for the team in TALA on sustainability, yeah?
Yeah, the two main points where it comes up is one around price, because we have a price sensitive customer, although every customer has a price sensitivity at a certain point. She has share of wallet with brands typically that are less expensive than we are, and so we're always trying to think about how to engineer it in a way that is as sustainable as possible, but also keeps it at a price point that's still accessible to our customer. And then the other way I would say is on supply chain, and there's probably a bit of a disconnect between the perception of the availability of resources that are more sustainable and the actual availability of those resources, especially when you're quite a small brand. So if we could go out and make all of our own fabrics and things tomorrow and build a lab where we're engineering fabrics for mushrooms, we absolutely would. It's not something we have the scale to do yet, but we will get better and better at it as our marketing power gets bigger.
Very good. Okay, I think we have a hard stop at 20 past, so thanks for listening. Hope it's been useful, and I'm sure Morgan would be happy to chat with people afterwards, and likewise myself, yeah. Thanks very much, bye.
Thank you.